line. So thank you so much for bearing with us. This is a long conversation because there are so many different aspects that are really relevant when you want to look at livestock methane. I was at a panel last night where somebody was talking about complex systems requiring complex solutions. And that's definitely the case here. As somebody said earlier, there's no two cows that are exactly the same, no two farms that are the same, no two farmers, no two food businesses, etc. Up to this point today, we've heard primarily from US and European farmers. And we wanted to also bring in the voices of small-scale farmers in the Global South. So I'm very happy to have with us today Claudia Arndt and Khaoula Essoussi. Yes, you say your name again in a minute. So won't you please both introduce yourselves very briefly, say who you work with, what your main interests are, and then hopefully we can have a good discussion going. Also, I want to just thank people. This has come together quite last minute with a new panelist who's jumping in. So bear with us as we find our way, and I'll probably throw it to audience questions quite quickly.
So my name is Claudia Arndt. I'm working for the International Livestock Research Institute. I'm based in Nairobi, leading a laboratory called Mazingira Center, where we're looking at environmental impact from livestock and mostly emissions. And we are basically the East Africa measurement hub, having all the measurement capacities that you need to look at emissions and trying to make farming more sustainable by figuring out reducing the environmental impact of livestock production and optimizing the resource use. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khaoula Essoussi. It's not so common, so it's normal. A lot of people call me Khaoula. So actually, I work for Danone, but specifically, I'm working on the implementation of climate-smart livestock actions on Africa region. So very linked to smallholders, farmers as our main farming footprint. We're working with 45,000 farmers, dairy farmers in Africa, out of 50,000 of Danone globally. So our biggest farming and farmers are based in Africa, and we are working mainly with smallholders there. So thank you for inviting me to be here.
Thank you so much for both coming on. And I want to maybe kick it to you, Claudia, for a minute, because I know that, you have some photos. Let's see if they will work. Those yours? Yes.
Oh, yeah, it's on that.
You do.
Perfect.
So why don't I kick it to you for a minute to describe maybe briefly a little bit the arc of your career. You don't have to give your whole resume, but Claudia did work for EDF for a while, and I'm always very happy to point that out with impressive people like Claudia. And then talk about your current work, and then we can talk about what makes working with smallholders, especially in Africa, different to what some of us are doing in the North? And then we connect that to Danone's work.
Okay. Yeah. So let's start out. So I'm actually originally from Germany, getting far out. So I did a bachelor's in environmental management and agricultural science, thinking I was going to go to environmental management, but then I decided I'd rather do livestock production and do something to the environment while producing that, to find ways to do that, than actually understanding the system. So that was my choices. Then I went into livestock production, and I actually already did my research for my thesis in the US. I ended up in the US at Wisconsin, University of Madison, Wisconsin for my PhD, where I looked at enteric methane emissions from cattle and looking at different dietary effects and also at efficiencies from cattle. And then I took a year off, went to Latin America, learned Spanish, but then started working for EDF for a postdoc afterwards, was here for 2 years, did work in California with the big dairies. We did a big study back then where we did different measurement scales on dairies in California to see if the emissions were really what the inventory would say. Because back then there was a big pushback saying that dairy was actually emitting more than what the inventory was saying. And we were like, no, like we know what a cow emits. This isn't like, we don't think we're so wrong with that. So that's why we did actually these studies. And there we actually found, but it was known that the manure has quite different emissions. What we were talking about earlier this morning, if you have a manure lagoon in the summer when it's warmer and the microbes actually can work, then they produce a lot of methane. So that lagoon actually can produce as much methane as a cow in a year from the manure of a cow if you don't do anything. And that's why California also did a lot of implementing biogas digesters now and so on. So they went quite quickly forward on that. And I think maybe there is where policies are in place to do something compared to what's happening in Ireland, where Pete was talking about. So there's been a huge move in California, I think. After that, I was in Costa Rica, working already with dairy farmers there as well, also more smallholders for 2 years. And I did 1 year in Peru. And then I came to my current position, leading the lab down in Nairobi, but still working majorly on enteric methane emissions. But the challenges are very different for smallholders. So I see sort of both sides. And when we talked about today, I wanted to bring actually the slides with us to make you see what a smallholder is. When I talk about a smallholder in Africa, it's different than what you would understand being here in America, because I've been educated here, right? So I know what I would have thought 5 years ago before I started all my endeavors down in the global south. So let me see. So here I was this is really extreme. This is China actually on the left. Is a dairy that has nearly 500,000 cattle. That's the milking parlors. So China actually would find both of these systems. You find these extremely large dairies, and then you find on the right, that is from a Ugandan farm, where you have hand milking actually going on with the calf next to it, because otherwise the cow won't let the milk down. So it's just, so you see the extremes of systems, and I always find that quite interesting to show, because it's so different challenges that we face in reducing methane and doing something for the environment when we look at these systems. Then this is a biogas digester. This is a small one. Preferably I would have one from California next to it. That's one at ETH Zurich, compared to a farmer back in Ethiopia having the digester on the farm that he's working with. So just, again, I find it amazing seeing the differences. And here, I don't know where there was, because my comms helped me to send it. It was a broiler production on the left, and then you see a smallholder chicken raiser on the right. So the things you're going to do in these systems are going to be very, very different. And then just to give you an overview of what a smallholder dairy in Kenya would look like in a humid, subhumid area. So we have 80% of the land will be arable. We will have less than 10 hectares. We will have small livestock holdings that have less than 10 cattle. Often it's like 4 cattle, maybe 1 or 2 lactating cows. And we will have a mixed herd composition with 45% adult females. And the milk production is going to be 4 liters a day. We've sent actually a manuscript to the Journal of Dairy Science, and one of the reviewers came back to us and was saying that that was not a lactating or milking dairy cow, because it was only producing 4 liters a day. So I actually yeah, we never made it through the Journal of Dairy Science, but I think because it was an American review, and they were like, that's not a dairy cow, it's 4 liters. And my Kenyan PhD student was like,
scandalized.
Yes. So, but
yeah, well, I will already stop you and we can continue on this, but I want to bring you in straight away. Like in Danone, North Africa, what do you consider a sort of high producing cow, and what are the variation? I think last week I was in New York upstate with John. I think it was 10 to 12 or gallons was kind of at average there.
Yeah, to be honest, this is not surprising me, because we have seen in other places in Danone even 2 liters per cow per day. And Nigeria specifically. So I think one of the biggest challenge today is really that we have a different cattle system and a cattle actually genetics in Africa, and especially with the local breeds that are completely different what we are seeing in Europe or North America. Mm-hmm. And actually, this is quite embedded in the local culture in some places where we are operating or working. I've been in the last couple of months on the field, seeing all the farmers I'm seeing in Egypt. This is part of the pride and the culture and the local culture to have their own cows, to have their own milk and produce their own cheese is part of the embedded on the culture and the pride of the family. So usually most of these farmers are not doing this for business subsistence, but it's also cultural heritage that they have from their older generation. Finding a way actually for these farmers to have access to market and to valorize these milk production that they have, increase their productivity, having more efficiency is really valuable, because it's at the end more social impact, increasing their livelihoods, strengthening their livelihood in these areas, and strengthening actually their lives. And they don't really, and we are seeing in some areas where they're closer to the cities, a lot of the farmers, they are actually starting to suffer, and they're seeing the climate change, and they're seeing all these impacts on their operation and closing activity, selling the cows to the meat industry and going and completely changing the activity, going to the cities to find another job. We are seeing this a lot. We are seeing it in Morocco in the herd decline. What we are seeing in terms of herd decline, we are seeing it even worse than on the Africa regions, and with a lot of things, because of the, of course, the support to the farmers is not the same from local government and policies. It's not they are suffering from the impact of the climate change that even seen on these areas, and also, of course, impacted by a lot of external factors like the commodities, inflations, and we know the last couple of years it was very hard to the farmers. So yeah, these are actually the challenges that we operate on these areas, and we see one of the biggest thing and stake and opportunity actually is really how to, because there is we see there is a potential how to increase efficiency of these farms so that they can produce more milk, try to understand these low milk productive cows, how to bring it maybe not to the same level as what we see in Europe and the US, but actually in a level that they can produce more milk and they have more stable revenue for the farmers that they can also stabilize and can also kind of grow and invest in this activity as well in the area where they are living, where they have their families anchored, and the village and the community, and they don't need to actually completely change that because they cannot live anymore from this activity.
Yeah, no, very totally understandable, and it's good to hear the two. I mean, this farmer is like doubling already, so he's doing pretty well. So you've obviously seen cows around the world, and I'll let you get back to your slides. Like, what is ILRI? What are you looking at? Obviously, productivity is the prize for a lot of people, increasing productivity. So back to you, Claudia.
Thank you very much. The next slide actually was showing the pastoral system where we have less than 2 liters.
Okay, there we go.
That's it.
So, but there is a multi-herd structure again, and they just have different breeds. Mm-hmm. But another challenge actually for Africa is that they need to scale up because human population is going to go up. So we need to actually increase production. I may get the numbers wrong, but like Kenya is looking into doubling milk production, and Kenya is one of the countries that has the highest milk production consumption per capita in the country, in Africa as well, I think. So we're looking, and I think actually across Africa we're looking at increasing livestock production, because we only have currently per capita consumption is about a fourth of animal protein compared to Europeans. And then we have a steep population growth, and the per capita consumption is not supposed to go up all that much. It will be a third of predicted of European consumption by 2050. But the consumption, or like the product that we need, is going to go up because of population growth. And it's not because they're going to start eating suddenly too much animal source food. It's really needed in areas where you can't use the land for other things. And I talked with Pete about that last night. There's pasture land in Ireland that you can really, what you're going to use it for, you can't use it for crop, you use it for dairy production. It's the same with the rangelands. You can do dryland agriculture, but like really it is well used with livestock, and especially in these marginal areas where the land not necessarily can give you more than the grass, you still get animal sourced food. And these areas, it's very important to have that because of nutrition. And sometimes when we talk to Global North colleagues, they will be like, oh, but we're producing milk with so much less emissions, we can just supply it to Africa. These people, they're not going to be able to afford that milk. That milk, any imports, is not going to reach these marginal farmers that don't have a lot of resources to get that nutrition for their children, for themselves. So I think that needs to be not forgotten. And often, like, I think COVID also reminded us on like self-sustainability, especially when it comes to food within countries. So I think we need to go that way as well. And the big thing is, to me, Global North systems, they haven't been there that long. Like the Green Revolution hasn't been there that long. We don't really know if they're all that sustainable, because sometimes you want to take the system from here in a box and implement it in Africa. And maybe we need to watch out, and we actually need to see what's there with our culture and norms, what will work in different environments. So we need to optimize systems within an environment, not try to put a system in a box from Europe into Africa.
Yeah.
To me, that's very important. And the other thing I'm trying to remind people is, also in the Global North, and we forget that, the environment has a certain carrying capacity. So no ag system is ever going to be 100% efficient. We're always going to have losses to the environment. And we need to make sure that the environment can carry these losses that we're going to have and not overstep it, because then we're going to see like nitrate pollution and all these things, because the environment can't cope with it. But if we can live or like produce within the burden of our environment, then it will help. And I think like the environment usually is very good in building that buffer.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to pick up on, which is really interesting, is so we've got these grazing pastoral systems, and one criticism you often hear from the environmental community in the North, which I'm like part of that community. I haven't said this, but people in the community will say, oh, using land to feed animals to then feed humans is incredibly inefficient. And I guess it depends on how, right? Because as we've heard earlier as well from John this morning, cows are actually really efficient at digesting things that humans couldn't eat, right? That's not always the case. We do feed cows things that humans can eat as well, so that's a different discussion. But like here in Africa, obviously, there is a lot of that in these small-scale areas. What is the worry, or what are some of the solutions of how to keep feeding those animals in a climate-impacted world where water is becoming scarcer, it is hotter? How does that feed into your research and or looking into the future? I mean, for both of you.
Yeah. Maybe I've talked so much.
Thank you. It's very good question actually, because one of the, I would say, the critical topics that we want to work in, we are talking about efficiency, and then it's at least from the cow, we know it's like the two elements, either the cow longevity, health and welfare, and how we take care of the cow with the basic things and all the, in Africa we have a lot of the basics on vaccination, prevention, medical health and all this. And the other one is the feeding and feed efficiency. In a way, actually, we heard about the feed and the ration and what the cow need, what we need to feed the cow, and what is existing and what is available on the local. It's very important element. Actually, it's one of the priorities that we work on, because we know today sometimes we talk about that the optimized ration and what is the optimized, and we see it in Europe because I've been also looking at that. Sometimes it's perfect on paper, but at the end, the smallholders, they cannot afford for this. It is perfect to boost productivity. It's perfect to get you maybe what you want, but also sometimes it's not working because you don't have the genetics, because it's not the same breeds, it's not the same type of cows, and even if we put all this very kind of boosting ratio, it will not give you the same results. So that's why there is, and I agree with you, it's not a mimic solution. This is how it worked here, and we need to copy paste it in this area. The solution, we need to bring the know-how and the technologies, because we don't have time to kind of restart from the beginning to pilot and new things. We need to bring kind of a know-how and the technology and try to adapt it to the local context and build it with the local expertise, because there will be a lot of other parameters that will enter into that building of these models that need to be considered, like the social aspect, the cultural, the other things that maybe when you bring the expertise from the north, you don't see that, but it will be important to reflect it. And that's one of the things that we try, for example, to implement what we call it adapted ration. Actually, maybe we don't need it to be to the maximum productivity, but actually what can be adapted to the local smallholders, that with local species that are available in that area, but we don't need have higher irrigation systems and so on, but that is actually water resistant, local, will not bring us to the 30 liter per cow, but maybe to the 4 to 10 liter per cow. And in some areas, when we have all the basics of the health management fixed, that's why also when I think it needs to go together, we cannot actually boost the feed part without having also look at all the management, health management, and overall farm management basic as well. So a lot of things go through really what I say, the know-how, education, technical support to the farmers. We put in place even like what we call field schools to the farmers to put in place actually all this, to bring these best practices, how things should work. Because sometimes we felt in some of the projects, when you have a piece of land and you showcase some examples, it's very visible, and the farmer, he will see that this crop here is growing very well. The cows, everything happen inside, and usually it's the women taking care of the cows, and sometimes it's not very easy on bringing this this knowledge and bring this, and it's one of the pillars actually that we need to work on, because all this the technologies and the best practices are there, we can bring it, but how to convince actually the farmers to use it, and this is also one of the things that help us to scale up this, especially it would be very domino effect, where if one proves the success, it will be talking about it on the community, on the small village, everyone will start to implement it, and then will be kind of a domino effect, and this is actually what is very important in this very small scale farming system.
Thank you.
I think you farmers are very fortunate, because like you mostly probably interact with your suppliers, because there are a lot of farmers that are actually in the informal market. Actually, the majority of farmers are informal. So that means the milk they produce, either it's just for themselves and then may sell it to their neighbors, but they will never bring it to a dairy cooperative that then sells it. So that's where you actually get the access to the vaccines and everything, because often vaccines are batch vaccines. So there's like 20, 50 vaccines in a vaccine. So one farmer is not going to be able to vaccinate their cattle if they're not in a cooperative. And if you're not part of the formal system, which I would even like, at least in East Kenya, there's different regions, right? Like I think, not East Africa, sorry, it's over 90%, I would say 95% of the production is still informal. So it's quite hard. And there are 70 million smallholder producers in Africa. So you can't get enough extension on the ground. It's very hard. So the different extension services. So what the cooperatives are doing, that is great. If you're a farmer producer, then you have all that support. But if you're not doing that, you're not getting that support. So there are different ways of educating
just sort of
as well.
for the audience at home and here in the room, just very quickly, just one thing we talk about a lot, and just to be clear, we're talking now about vaccines, which is to keep your cattle healthy, because one of the ways, obviously, to keep the emissions down over the life cycle of a cow is to ensure that cow is healthy, right? Because if you think a cow dies by the time it's, before its second milking period, then you've had all of those emissions for very little milk. So if you're really looking at efficiency, making sure the cows are healthy is really important, both from an environmental perspective and obviously also for the owners of the cow, who it is very important to their small family economy. I'm looking at the time. I think we could chat for hours. I'm thinking this is so great, and I haven't even asked you. I wanted to maybe close with one question to you, and then I'll take some questions from the audience. So right now, I just wanted to make sure that, what is it that you're focusing on right now at ILRI?
There's so many things.
Pick your two favorite things.
So then, of course, I stay with my laboratory. There are other people who work on feeds as well, but we're looking at emissions. We have now a little seed fund from ETF to look at health as well. So we actually have people that started in the field right now to look at productivity and disease and see if we can actually get the data from farms. We're looking at that, and also at causes for abortion. So that is a really nice project that we're working on. I hope we can actually extend more, because I really wanted to do that for a long time. Talk to the person who leads the Global Research Alliance Animal Health Network for a while, until this thing came through, and we're like, yes, finally we can start something, and hopefully jumpstarts more that we can do in collaboration with ILRI's health team, which is also very big. And then we have the genetics team. We're currently looking and potentially we're writing a proposal to look at genetics and emissions, to maybe move in that space as well. So we'll see if their funds come through for that. We just, honestly, what we're doing is very basic, just getting evidence and data. So that's what our lab is doing, looking at herd structures, understanding more what's going on, because there's very little data on the African continent in the emission space and livestock in general. So that is really our focus, to get evidence, to make decisions and support policymakers with evidence that we're building. But it sounds like you're doing a lot on sort of the emission space, the genetic space, but then obviously also you have a very good understanding of the socioeconomics, you're very eloquent about what the farmers are dealing with. And I think we need to see everything in that system, right? These are not robots the cows are not robots that we can program and that we can just put a switch on and off. They are living, breathing beings who are not all identical, and the farmers who work with them are not all identical, et cetera, et cetera. Also really important, we have the Jersey and the Holstein cows next to us here, but, bring a Holstein cow to Central Africa or India, and they'll probably keel over from the heat. So we need to also, the idea of just bringing the best, highest producing cow in the world genetically from one region to another is also something that is just quite unrealistic. So it's not just the heat. So they have been doing that. They actually have been doing quite well. And farmers will think, I want a Holstein cow. And it's like, you can't even feed your native cow. It's not really looking very good. So if we're not developing, there's been a lot of progress on genetics, at least in East Africa, but there's not been progress on the feed at the same time. So then the nutrition of these animals is not good. Then we get poor reproductive performance of these animals and so on. So it needs to go hand in hand. But the disease resistance, going back to the health, is also not going to be so good. From the drought, actually, we had the native sheep were still standing, and the rest basically died. We just had this massive drought, and so many animals were lost, just dying. And then we talked about it. They're not accounted for in the food system emissions. There will be in the national emissions, but in the food system is emissions because it never became a product. So they will never be accounted for. So we also have accounting problems here in how we look at emissions and avoiding emissions losses that
I
are
didn't
not
realize that.
productive.
So if you die before you become a product, that's it. You're not counted for in food.
Yeah, I don't think you count it in the food system emissions. You will
Very
still be in the inventory, but because you never became food,
Okay. John, we can take some questions now. Yes, Peter already has his hand up. Think of your questions for this great panel.
Probably less of a question, but more a reflection as a farmer. I think it is so important that everybody continue to support the work that you guys do, because, as you said, it's very easy to move that food production system into the Northern Hemisphere, and we've big farms, we're really efficient at doing it, but it's why we need to continue producing food in all the areas that we are around the world, and really get behind what you guys do, because, as I've said before, sustainable farming is about being sustainable for communities and populations too. And I've been to Kenya twice, and I see how phenomenal these guys are to manage cows. And I really take my hat off to them, in a tougher environment. But ultimately, what we must remember in the Western world and in the Northern Hemisphere and developed societies is that, funding the likes of the work that you do in challenged countries, that is helping those communities and populations to feed themselves when, we look at what climate change is doing and the conflicts in the Ukraine, and, they are the people that feel the brunt of all those challenges firsthand. So I think it's important that anyone watching, any corporations, any etc., really get a handle on that is feeding, really challenged society, and I think we know the challenges that they feel when global commodity prices go really high, that they can't afford to compete with us for product on world markets. So we need to help them to produce their own food. So well done to you, and continued success.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that. I fully agree. And I think we have to be very careful not, we can't ever put one metric in front of the other. Like I think, Katie, you pushed on that as well. Obviously, we're looking at things through a methane lens now because it is very important. But food security is equally as important. And we can never, we have to be very careful that we don't push policies that jeopardize one over the other. And as Claudia said, COVID has shown that supply chains can easily break. So local food security is important. And then obviously there's just food access. Just because we produce enough food in the world doesn't mean people can access it, either because it's physically not accessible or it's not affordable. So really, really good point, Peter. Any more questions? Finn?
There's a question that came up actually on a previous panel online, but I think it's really pertinent to this discussion. So it's a question on discussing productivity versus sustainable intensification and whether there's any consideration of that. So the question was talking about how some countries are considering sustainable intensification as a solution, but then others like the Netherlands or Ireland are taking that opposite approach and either de-intensifying or not intensifying. So how is that playing out?
I have some opinions, but I'll let the panel go first.
Yeah, maybe I can try to answer from not my current work on Africa, because as Danone, actually, we have it all kind of the system around the world, from the large-scale farmers, NORAM, grazing system in Ireland or in New Zealand or South Africa, to smaller scale smallholders in Africa. I think there is no fit-for-all solution, and everything we see and we are convinced that need to be the solution implemented on the scale, or let's say of the landscape, landscape or the limit of the landscape on the ecosystem in terms of actually environmental outcomes, but we say also there is linkage and trade-off. It needs to be holistic view when we implement certain sustainable or mitigation actions, either to climate, need also to take care of the other elements on the water and on the biodiversity. Maybe a word that you see, and this is actually what we define as also our regenerative agriculture approach. It's an holistic approach that took relevant for all systems. There is not a farming system that can be qualified as regenerative, another that is not. All the system can go and can have a journey toward regeneration on the limit of the landscape that consider the farmers at the heart, the actually animal welfare and the environmental impact, the environmental part on the climate change, on soil health, water biodiversity. And I think answering to that, actually, the solution need to be adapted to the scale. Are we exceeding the limit, or let's say on the boundaries on that system, either on the environmental side, either on the climate, either on water quality, either on biodiversity loss? I think when we are exceeding that boundaries on that system, meaning that maybe we need to go back on an area that is more on a regeneration. And so I don't think it will be the same everywhere. It will need to be adapted to the local specificities of each farming system.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think instead of sustainable intensification, I think the word was used more often already here today, is optimization. So we want to look at optimization. Also, something we haven't mentioned is adaptation. Actually, is priority of African countries. It's not mitigation when it comes to the NDCs. Just because of what climate change, Africa has been disproportionately hard hit by climate change and will be. And the size of the farms are just not that big when you talk about smallholders. That they have the resources to deal with things when they're hit really hard. And no, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, it comes later to me again, maybe.
No problem.
It's just, yeah.
Katie.
Thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I guess I'm wondering, given all of these challenges and some of the tools and tactics that you all have talked about, what do you see as the means to get to scale with all, if there's this many farmers, smallholder farmers, what are the various tools we have to try to reach them? And, what's been tried, what's not worked, what's going to be tried next?
So they're different. So every country has an extension personnel. Then a lot of it goes through like the dairy cooperatives. Then there are digital apps that have been for a while on the market that do free farmer training and so on. But they also been struggling in actually getting funding. But I friend of one, and she her passion is really to give free training to farmers through their cell phones, for example. And you have I think we need to have.
Do farmers use them?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can make them available, if we can figure out a way to.
It needs to be something of value to the farmer. That's always what she emphasized. They will use it if they find it valuable. Yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. The optimization of production, the thing is that these farmers, milk production is not their number one goal. Often they have a cow because they like the cow. Maybe the cow is there to be sold for there's so many more complex. And adaptation is not just adaptation within their own system, but adaptation with their activities around the farm. So I had an Uber driver who's I have a cow at home, produce quite a good of milk. The cow could produce more milk, but that means I need to be at home. I wouldn't be driving this here. So now that's, for him, driving the Uber is much more secure than being at the farm having the cows producing more milk. Because if something goes wrong, then he doesn't have an alternative income to make up for whatever environmental impact may hit him. So understanding the drivers for the farmers, what they're doing is very important. We do have the social scientists at ILRI, but we still struggle to work closer together. And I think in other organizations, the silos may be even bigger in that, and we do need to have the social scientists to understand the farmers and what their needs are and what they need value. But in the rangelands, we would we ask them usually. So we go collect data for understanding what their herd sizes are and so on. Then, but we will give back, and we'll ask, okay, we give a training. What do you want the training on? Or silage making. So silage and hay making, and it's really just to like bridge the times where they don't have a lot of forages, and often they don't know because traditionally their systems are transhumanic. They would go through different, like they didn't have to do that because they were mobile systems, and now they find themselves in the situation with land rights and so on. Suddenly they're sedentary, and then they're starting growing crops, but never been really. Like they don't know how necessarily to use the manure in a proper way. They may sell the manure from the animal enclosures where they have the animal at night, but they don't know themselves how to apply it to their crops. So
Holistic systems, yeah.
yeah, and even talking about having more water pans, because then they're running, like these animals go 2 days, like when they go to water, like they will have 1 day.
Wow.
For the pastoralist systems, and coming from where I've been taught a cow needs to have access all the
Fresh
time
water.
to water, to a system where I'm standing there and been told, yeah, we go to the water pen every other day because it's just too far, because I also need to take them somewhere where they can graze something, and then they go to the water pan.
Yeah.
So it's
Different realities to what we're hearing about here. I think we probably need to close now, and we have one more panel with another local farmer, very different system. But I want to thank you both so much for an interesting conversation.
Thank you.